and last panel presentation will be Elma Rahman and Sharon Jackson of Queens College here in New York, and wonderful title, Bridges Through Stories. I'm eager to hear about it.
Hi everyone, I'm Elma, this is Sharon, and we're presenting, we're presenting on the topic Bridges Through Stories, Interfaith Dialogue and Awareness Through Literature. And this is a topic that's very close to home for us, and the reason I say that is because we're two girls from Queens. And in Queens, we celebrate how diverse and how multicultural we are, but even then there's so much divide, and one of the ways that we can minimize that gap is through teaching and through literature. And I've been a teacher for the last 2 years, so I work with curriculum in schools, because I remember yesterday a gentleman brought up, what about intergenerational dialogue? And that's something we get to engage in school and through literature, so that we all have a chance to really talk about religion in a meaningful way and also express ourselves, so we can grow in terms of respect.
Before we discuss our paper further, I just want to take a look at an excerpt from a novella called Fajr, which is one of the texts that we used in our research. So I'm just going to read it out loud. Can you guys hear me? Okay, cool. Okay, so Fajr, chapter 1, Adam's words. The girl was watching me, amazed. After a small silence, she breathed, "You can see me?" "Huh?" I raised an eyebrow. "See you?" I asked, taken aback. Yeah, of course I can." The girl stood up slowly, examining me with widened, puzzled eyes. When we were standing face to face, I could see that she was only slightly shorter than me. "You must be her sister," I said softly. "You look exactly the same." Her expression was unreadable. "Who are you?" she finally asked. "My name is Adam Kalb," I told her. "And you?" The girl hesitated, and suddenly she looked scared. At last she breathed, "I'm Fajr." "What?" "Fajr al-Nur." For a long moment, neither of us said anything. My mouth had gone dry. "No, I must have heard her wrong," I reasoned. "Did you say—" My voice trailed off. "Yes," she said more firmly this time. "I am Fajr. I am the girl who died." And as my eyes widened in shock, the girl disappeared before my eyes. So, although I'm no R.L. Stine, I actually wrote this story, this ghost story. And Elma and I used this, as well as another text, to explore a few things. Okay. So what we set out to do in our research is to first compare the reactions of students from different faiths to literature that deals with interfaith friendship and dialogue and preconceptions stemming from religious background. Then we examine if and how their attitudes towards the other change in response to the text. So I want to note that we use the term other here loosely to refer to anyone who identifies differently from the reader, whether by culture, religion, or ethnicity. And finally, we demonstrate how students can gain awareness through literature and use it in their everyday lives within our society and community.
So during our research, we got the opportunity to work with 3 different groups, and we were able to extract a lot of valuable insight from each one. The first group that we worked with is a class of 12 ninth grade students from an Islamic school, and I was actually their English teacher at the time, and I was very excited when Sharon approached me to teach this story, Fajr, in my class. So going back to the demographics of the students, there were 10 girls and 2 boys in the class, everyone from Southeast Asian background. And the way that we approached the text is that first the students completed a pre-story survey to measure their attitudes towards Jews and likelihood of experience taking, which is a term we're going to define a little bit later. Then I assigned for the students to read this story at home. So many of them already started reading it in class, and they're like, "This is so good, this is so different. We never read anything like this before." And they read it at home, and they had to bring questions to class the next day so we can sit in a Socratic seminar, which is like a big circle where everyone just kind of jumps into this discussion to really make it meaningful to each person. After reading the story, they completed another survey to measure their attitudes towards Jews after reading, because this is a group of all Muslim students. And then at the end, about a week later, they completed a final survey to determine the effects of the story over time.
The second group that we observed was a focus group of 4 students from a public high school. All 4 students were in the 10th grade, female, Catholic, and of Hispanic heritage. Since it was a smaller group, our method was a little different this time. So they too completed a pre-reading survey, but before reading the text, we engaged in a discussion about whether or not our faiths or religion should matter when choosing our friends. We then read the story aloud one-on-one. It was their choice. They wanted to do it that way, actually. We stopped at different parts to comment on the events in the story, and after that, they took a post-story survey measuring their level of experience taking.
And then the final group that we worked with, even though this isn't in any chronological order, this last group here was actually between the 2 high school groups. And it was a little different because it was a workshop with 30 to 40 students in college, both at the graduate and undergraduate level, either already teachers or becoming teachers. And the way I went about it was a little bit differently because it was a workshop. I got to work with one of my professors, and the topic was Muslim teacher identity in the public school and sometimes how that can be problematic. So to promote teaching for social justice, I had Sharon come in and we got to share our findings from the work that we did with the first group. So my approach with this final group was a little bit different. I really put them on the spot, and it was a little maybe unfair and unconventional, because what I did was I asked them to look at me, and then I'm like, tell me your views on the niqab, the veil. And I'm pointing at it, and I'm wearing it, and I can tell they don't want to offend me in any way. And they're kind of shaky. I'm like, no, it's okay. And one of the students even said, well, we don't want to step on any toes. I'm like, you can step on my toes, just don't break my leg, you know? But the idea was to really get them to talk about something that can be challenging, because that's the starting point for all of us. I then asked them to compare a selfie of me with another image of a man in a veil, and that's when they were able to really open up, because it's not me anymore, it's this image, and then they can really separate the person and something that's now a piece of text. And then finally, we discussed effective questioning strategies to engage students in discussions on topics considered controversial, to demonstrate teaching for social justice, and examine the results of teaching Fajr to the students from the Islamic school to consider redesigning curriculum. The other 2 texts that we worked with are The Minister's Black Veil and Fajr. So The Minister's Black Veil is a short story written by Nathaniel Hawthorne, an American writer, and it's about this man who wears a black veil that covers the top half of his face. And the moment he decides to start wearing it, he doesn't take it off. And it really, fear and gossip kind of spread throughout, because people couldn't understand what was the purpose of this veil. Why are people wearing this? Why is he wearing this? And at the time of his death, his ex-fiancée came to him, pled with him, please just take it off. But he refused, and as he was dying, he told the people of the town that they are all wearing black veils of their own, a symbol of this original sin that we talked about yesterday.
So, so Fajr, as you can see over there, the Minister's Black Veil is written by the American Romantic writer. Fajr is written by the American awkwardly romantic adventure writer, me. It actually takes place in Queens, And it centers around two main characters who take turns telling their stories. The first character is Fajr, the title character. She's a young Muslim girl who has been killed in a hate crime. And Adam, a Jewish boy, who is the only one who can see her ghost. Fajr's cousin Haitham is also an important character in that he wants to avenge Fajr's death, but since Fajr cannot communicate with Haitham, she needs Adam to try to convince Haitham to let go of his anger. So, in the climactic ending, all the characters will see themselves and each other for who they really are. But I won't tell you how it happens. I'll let you sit in suspense. Sorry. What really inspired me to bring Fajr to Elma's classroom in the first place was I came across an article written by two researchers, Geoff Kaufman and Lisa Libby. They wrote this article in 2012. And they were exploring something called experience taking. So basically, if you like to read, you're not going to be surprised that readers can lose themselves in a story. But sometimes they can lose themselves so deeply that they become one with the main character. They take on the traits and beliefs of the main character. And so that process, when you lose yourself in the story and take on those traits or beliefs, is known as experience taking. And they discovered that it's more likely to happen when the story is told in first-person perspective, and that racial background and sexual orientation of the narrator had to either match that of the reader or be revealed to the reader later on in the story for experience taking to occur. So the thing about experience taking is that when reader and character are of different backgrounds and experience taking occurs, the reader is no longer afraid of the other because he or she has now become one with the other.
So the way that social justice can work in a classroom is that if we can include it by talking about difficult issues instead of ignoring them. A lot of times we're so busy trying to be politically correct that we kind of staunch or stop this idea, stifle critical thinking. The other way is also by introducing students to the impact of some groups' privileges in society, and also building curriculum that promotes diversity to eradicate the prejudice encouraged by society and the media.
Okay, so in this research, there were a few measures that we borrowed from Kaufman and Libby's research. So we didn't put them all up here, but these are just some examples of the things we put in the surveys. So the first three, I found myself thinking what the characters in the story were thinking or feeling. I understood the events of the story as though I were the characters in the story. And while I was reading the story, activity around the room around me was on my mind. Those three were used to measure levels of experience taking. And the last one, a Jew is just as likely to be a good person as anyone else, was a measure of prejudice.
So these are our results from the three groups that we observed. And the first group, none of the students expressed any negative attitudes towards the Jews prior to or even after the reading. And part of that might have to do with kind of the geography of where our school is. In one block, or in three different blocks, there's a Catholic school, an Islamic school, and then a Jewish school. So it's like they see each other all the time, so they don't have these negative feelings towards each other. They did, however, gain a new understanding of Judaism and issues within the Jewish community that they were not aware of before. They focused mainly on symbols within the story and Fajr and Adam's friendship. And their takeaway was a very hopeful one. And then going back to the idea of experience taking, most students reported that Fajr had an emotional impact on them.
So now for the focus group of the four public school students, so they expressed sympathy toward both the Muslim and the Jewish characters in Fajr. One student sympathized with and understood a character with whom she did not agree, and another identified what she called the emotional corruption of prejudiced characters as a way of shutting off empathy. I was very impressed with that term. She's in high school, and I thought that was very cool. They focused on the conflicts, both internal and external, And their takeaway was a newfound awareness of the injustice caused by these social issues. And they also reported that their story had an emotional impact on them.
With the final group, because I put them on the spot in the beginning, they were nervous at first to share their thoughts, but once they really came out of their shells, I had them work in small groups, and then we brought it out to like bigger group, like a whole group discussion. They were able to really express themselves better. And then they also were able to differentiate the different reasons for wearing the veil and the impact that the time period and media has on people's perception of the veil. And then some of them reflected on how they were able to ask certain questions about the niqab only after being forced to think about it.
So basically, carrying out this research has really driven home the point for us that different readers approach text differently. And, you know, I was really blown away by some of the things the readers of Fajr said. You know, like, I wrote the story, but I came away with a new way of looking at my own text, and I was very surprised and very amazed. Another thing is that it's true that teachers, students, and people in general are often afraid of opening up a can of worms by talking about thorny topics like prejudice. But talking with these three groups has proven to us that very often it's worth it. Stepping back from our research, we have a few recommendations. Classroom teachers may consider incorporating into their curriculum more literature inclusive of characters with a wider variety of backgrounds and whose plots cover controversial topics. And writers may choose to have more than one main character, each of different backgrounds, who alternate their stories, because then that way they'll draw in more readers of different backgrounds and they can connect with those characters.
Every reader, both within a group and across groups, approach text differently. These different approaches, when shared with one another in discussion of a text, can shed new light on a topic and bring in more perspective. Also, both outside and within the classroom and the pages of a book, stories are bridges between worlds. In silence, the chasm is never crossed, but if we are not afraid to listen to and tell one another our stories, we bring a little more understanding into the world than there was before.
So we want to conclude with this idea that literature helps us become conscious, not only of our own surroundings and problems, but also of those of others, so that we grow together and enjoy in mutual respect.